Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this next installment of our collaborative webinar series on HIPAA security and privacy issues. This webinar series is presented by Kesis Health and QIP Solutions. And today we will be looking at creating an ongoing HIPAA compliance and risk management program, one that is repeatable, documented, and monitored. I am Adam Bully, and I'll serve as our moderator. I will also be presenting today with Mark Prentner of Kesis Health. Mark is Vice President of Kesis Health and has over 20 years experience with IT project implementation, design, and management, all of which has been focused within the healthcare industry. He's a thought leader not just in HIPAA and high-tech compliance, but also in creating an organizational culture of compliance. As for me, I work with health privacy and information exchange with QIP Solutions. I work closely with companies in creating HIPAA compliance programs and workforce training programs. I focus on many different aspects of HIPAA and high-tech requirements. Just as some quick housekeeping, we would be happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation. We will also reserve some time at the end for any questions. Participants, you can raise your hand, which is under the Mood button at the top of your screen, or you can also chat your questions to us on the left, and we will address those when we get them.
Thanks, Adam.
So just because you are HIPAA compliant today does not mean at any point in the future you will be HIPAA compliant. Human error is the #1 cause of breaches of health data, but you can't always be policing your workforce. You have to have safeguards in place to help ensure that even if there is an error, it won't rise to the level of a breach. Also, new employees are onboarded frequently. Existing employees have changing job functions that might give them new access to PHI. But if you trained your workforce yesterday, hired a new person today but didn't train them, maybe you were compliant yesterday, but you're not compliant today. It's a constantly evolving world, and one in which a continual HIPAA compliance program, rather than a one-time project, is critical to protecting sensitive information. Now, I get it. HIPAA compliance is not glamorous. And it may not be something that you think of that's going to make your organization money. That's fine. But if you think about it, it is just as much as a money saver as a cheaper billing system or a new EHR. It's just not as easy to quantify on a balance sheet. Let's look at it this way. Let's say your organization has a diligent employee who takes a laptop home over the weekend to do some extra work. That laptop has PHI on it. Employee goes to the grocery store on Friday afternoon, and the unforeseeable happens. The car with the laptop in it is stolen, and now we have a very, very big mess on our hands. So we have two scenarios. You had a breach, so you will certainly have an investigation and probably a fine by the folks that I like to call the Privacy and Security Police, which is the Office of Civil Rights, or OCR. And we've already seen $7.8 million in fines for breaches in this year alone, which is more than last year. And OCR is taunting us and saying that these fines will pale in comparison to what's to come. But OCR is also on the record as saying a strong compliance program like the one we're talking about building today will help you as a mitigating factor when fines are determined. Now, OCR, despite all of their misgivings we may have with them, knows that crazy things happen. So that a big mess is a lesser, dare I say, cheaper mess than it could have been if we have a strong risk management HIPAA compliance program in place. Now, another way breaches cost organizations money is through reputational damage. How many of us, even for a second in our minds today, link Target with breach. And that's credit card data, which, while significant, can be fixed pretty easily. But if someone nefariously gets their hands on a patient's health records, there's no deactivation function to that. We can't just create a new health record, especially if it's in paper form. So how much more are people going to run from a provider with a breach than run from Target today? It just hasn't happened on the scale of a Target yet, but every indication is that it's only a matter of time and does. However, a culture of compliance within your organization can lessen, or even, and we hope, prevent that kind of damage, saving your organization untold dollars. And like I said earlier, it's not something that can easily be quantified. But ask organizations that have had a breach, and they will tell you that a good compliance program is as important, if not more important, than any other business operation their organization can have. Now with that, I will turn it over to Mark, and he will talk to us about how we build such a program.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate the background, the history, the build-up, because that's where we're headed. I'm glad you kind of brought that correlation from the Target aspect, just the mentality of what's happening from an industry, and you view that in the healthcare world with so much change that has been thrown our way, in particular, obviously, with where we're wanting healthcare to go, which is this valued information exchange between me, the patient, and my provider. Those aspects the expectation, I should say, of the patient will be around the same realm as what I expect my credit card information to be with a Target scenario. So where we're transitioning is this mode of a program. HIPAA security compliance means that covered entities and their business associates can demonstrate that they have a well-established business practices that are in place that are appropriate to their level of risk and complexity. That's really conceptually what they want to see. And I'm talking about, when I say what they want to see, this is the expectation. So when the audits are coming, the review are coming, the expectation is there, this is what foundationally needs to be put in place. But remember, we've had a lot of focus on risk assessment, but don't misunderstand. The risk assessment is simply the stimulant to launch an honest examination of the maturity of your security risk management efforts, and they should indicate where changes are needed. Having a program in place means that these policies, procedures, they're documented. The appropriate staff has been trained on them. You not only have implemented the procedures as defined, but you've also have a process for monitoring their effectiveness, so that there is a constant cycle there that you will see the implementation of an actual program, because that leads down to the ripple effect inside of your organization. Once you begin this journey, you've got to become conscious and aware that this pursuit of compliance, this culture of compliance, which is really the heart of the rule itself and has been around, it's going to have impacts throughout the organization. That's one of the greatest challenges that occur with our clients, is getting them to understand that securing PHI will have an effect on a lot of your resource time, resource schedule, as well as it's going to impact job duties for some folks. HIPAA is not just a project. It's not something you do once a year and you're finished. Because these areas of focus, like administrative controls, such as policy development, as well as, not only do you have to have the policy development in place, but the procedures to enact a policy have to be detailed for your particular organization. That's what you're going to end up being held accountable to and reviewed to. Is this what your organization does? They'll need to also, be updated and reviewed at a minimum annually. But as we know, change today with technology and a rapid changing environment, annually may not be enough for your organization. Then you talk about another ripple effect. One of the most critical points that's highly underserved for many is training. And training of the particular procedures that you enact in your organization around your structured policies. There are many standards-based trainings out there that folks have used, but they're so generic and they're done annually, they're not very effective for employee engagement, which, as Adam alluded to, the scenario that he just painted with leaving the laptop in the grocery store or in the car. I mean, that gets down to a lot of the really the egregious behavior that occurs is really lack of understanding and knowledge and an awareness. So that's where the consistency of a training program being implemented as a part of what you're doing around your compliance efforts has to be put in place. Then your ability, and it doesn't stop, right? The ability of the organization to have a formal review process that looks at the effectiveness and change that affects the program itself. As we know, change can have many faces. Regulatory change, HIPAA, there'll always be some sort of new mandate. It may not be yearly, it may be 5 years from now, but that change will affect. And once a change occurs, your organization will have to adapt. Many technical changes occur. You update systems. Technology has a massive impact, obviously, on what happens with information that you're generating with your patients and the engagement inside the office. But that doesn't remove also physical changes that are made, new buildings, new access, as well as administrative change or just staff changes in general. So this is just that reminder that really getting involved and creating a compliance culture is going to have a constant ripple down effect inside the organization. It is going to affect a lot of pieces and parts. It is a moving, living, breathing business function. It is not a one-time event or project. It's not just a risk assessment and I'm finished. And that's what has been occurring out in the marketplace. What I want to spend the next couple minutes on is giving some thought process and discussion into, well, what does some of this stuff look like? How do we carry this out? And what we have seen in our engagements with clients in the marketplace. And there's really two centralized, and that word at the top there, there's two areas, two ways to look at structuring your program management. There's a centralized mentality, which is this model here. You're seeing screenshots of a solution that we use, HIPAA HITech Express. But this model leverages an all-encompassing platform which allows an individual to work the process of program management through one interface. The interface houses all the risk management program components in a web-based repository with project management and project tracking tools integrated for the organization so they can centralize the process of risk management. The interface provides required elements of risk assessment, a guided assessment, risk analysis, remediation plan development, remediation tracking, policy and procedure library development, as well as online training interface with online video content. So there are solutions out in the industry that are based allowing you to centralize the process, which is, we find, highly effective for those that are resource-strapped, time-strapped. When you don't have a ton of resources, it makes it very difficult and to achieve this level of program management. And it's nice to have a centralized location or a tool that kind of wraps or helps me fundamentally have the program components of what I'm supposed to do in creating that culture of compliance. So there's a centralized location. This is just one. There are multiple ones out in the marketplace, but there's one mentality of putting a program in place. And then there is a decentralized mentality that exists as well. We work with clients that have this model in place. Decentralization really just means you have paper instruments that are involved, organizations that have invested in a policy or procedure template workbook from a lawyer or an accounting firm that they invested in years ago. They just never really implemented it. It hadn't been living, breathing, but that's what they want to stay with. They feel comfortable that they can work from that foundationally. Maybe they've started the realms of training on that yearly. So you have the paper process. But then in order to really have program components existing, you'll in these decentralized areas, you're still going to have to leverage technology. You will be leveraging your Microsoft Office tools. You'll be leveraging your Outlook calendar, Microsoft Word, because paper documents, you're going to want to have them in electronic format. You'll be moving those in those areas. Calendar, there's just so many things that you're required to do in your efforts of staying on top of, as an organization, how we're protecting information we're creating. So a calendar is a great way to do that. Outlook, just some techniques of responsibility, setting up meetings, review meetings, as well as just creating templates for logs, as far as logging information of review processes. And a lot of these systems also, you have many clients that have interfaced or outsourced their IT function, so they're going to get information from their business associates or their partners who will help with that. As well as in a decentralized environment, you'll need to be prepared, and folks can have this because they have folks that maybe have been trained or trainers themselves, so they'll need to access physical resources at the office location and time to create the training opportunities from all the materials that are put in place. And in the decentralized mode, like I said, this is where most folks have lived or living and are trying to accomplish the program components of risk management. And the reason why I wanted to kind of put those two things together, I'm going to transition back to Adam because we're going to talk about what we're experiencing and seeing from an audit perspective with our engagements, with our clients, because the nuances do matter, where they're putting their focal points on and what their expectations are for you as an organization.
Thanks, Mark. Great insight. You're right, the nuances do matter, and we talked about making a program that's monitored, and I think that's one of the most important things because we can all go out and make it the project that we really maybe wish it were because it's easier that way, but we're not monitoring it. And this part of the HIPAA privacy rule that I've put up here is something you may or may not know, and that is that an organization is required to designate one person within the organization as a chief privacy officer. And that's the person who patients can direct privacy-specific questions and concerns to. Also, staff can turn to for training and information on best practices. But what happens if you don't have an ongoing program in place and your chief privacy officer or your privacy designee takes a new job or changes positions? It's likely that that requirement, that one small 3 lines in a very big, weighty, complex rule will fall within the cracks. And for how long? Who knows? Because there's no review schedule in place to assess HIPAA and security, HIPAA privacy and security practices within the organization. We're not monitoring it, so it's not on our everyday mind to think, we really, maybe we're a small organization and it's not somebody's full-time job to be the privacy designate. So the person who leaves, it's not something that we may necessarily think about that we need to replace somebody as that designate, and it's likely that that won't happen until we create it as a new project again, which who knows how long that will be. And these are the kinds of things, we're going to talk in our next webinar, we'll touch on that a little bit later about the audits that are coming up. So I don't want to talk too much about that, but if you've heard, later this year, OCR is going to start a new permanent round of audits, and that's where some of the language I got before about saying how the fines that we've seen so far are going to pale in comparison to what we've seen. What we'll see in the future will pale in comparison to what we've seen. I mean, it seems they're very motivated to find the most nuanced, even if it's not egregious, violation for the organizations that will be audited. And the audits are random. They'll be both covered entities and business associates. So these small things could easily fall through the cracks for a long time. And yes, you would be out of compliance, but then there's no streamlined process if a patient does have a complaint or a question, or they feel that somebody mishandled their information. There's no streamlined process. There's no individual that they can directly go to, which is a problem when it comes to HIPAA compliance, but it's also a problem going back to what we talked about with reputational damage. So just a quick sort of summary. What are we talking about if we don't create this culture of compliance, this ongoing, repeatable, monitored program? Well, the audits will likely find more things if you are audited, but the inaction means no mitigation, like we touched on earlier. If you have a program, even if you can demonstrate a program that you did a risk assessment, that you remediated the things that were identified as gaps within your risk assessment, those are things that are points in your favor if you do have some kind of situation in which you could be levied with a fine. And the reputational damage. This amount is unquantifiable, really, and anybody who says they can quantify it is silly. But we know that it's a big chunk of capital that we are risking if we let our reputation be damaged in such an egregious way. Providers, healthcare industry really is based on trust and care. And if we don't have those two things because we're not protecting and securing the data, then it's a very difficult path to come back to. So that is the end of our prepared remarks. I have a couple of questions and that we have here. I will address those. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to let us know. So Mark, maybe this question's for you.
Sure.
Says you make this sound like a full-time job for one person, but what about smaller organizations that don't have those resources?
Great question. I'm gonna take the slide back to this mentality right here. I think the thing we want to encourage, and we work with single doc practice, 5 employees all the way up to multi-specialty clinic. But one of the things that is consistent, that you can put these program components in place. At least the thought process that you have an ability to assess yourself, you have the fundamentals to remediate from that assessment, that you verify, that you take the time to document, and that you have a simple monitoring capability in place. And that 4 kind of pronged mentality in a cycle can be done with limited resources. There are tools out there to help you do that, and they don't have to be big online tools. Like I said, you can do this in a decentralized manner. I think what just fundamentally has to happen is the organization has to commit to that understanding that this will be a program, that this will be a journey for the organization, and it's not just a one-time project. That's where resource strapped. But if you have that mentality, because the expectation from the audit community or even me as the patient is just, I want to know that the organization fundamentally is putting itself in place to at least be aware and working on it. When you're limited with resource and budget, that's why you're assessing yourself. You must be able to identify what things you can tackle as an organization to ensure a little bit higher level of security for what you can handle. You can't do the things that a hospital is going to do, but at least foundationally you've put yourself in a place that you are looking at your organization with this guides and mentality in place. But the resource stuff, one of the greatest things to do or challenges is to help that responsibility, share that responsibility. It is that privacy and security is held by one person usually, but having, the executives involved, or at least aware and involved in the situation of understanding at a minimum, hey, we've got to monitor and review this. I can start the path, but I've got to have the organization doing that.
Great. Another question we've had is, what would be the best first step to create this ongoing program?
And I can take that thought, Adam. It kind of drives off what I said. The assessment is vitally important, obviously. HHS, OC, they've come out and said they're expecting you to do the assessment. But I think what's vitally important, Adam, you mentioned it is this identification that there are roles and responsibilities for people inside the organization around privacy and security. That role is identified, that somebody that's in their job title, that is what they are going to be able to do. And is that a full-time job? Like I said, when you're resource strapped, it's not. But that has to be identified of who will take on that role inside the organization. And then once those roles are identified, that they can have these program element components in place, that they have the ability to assess themselves, they have the capability, whether they could do it internally or hire some outside resources to help them remediate, and then the ability to then verify, what they've done and monitor. Because one of the things that we have seen from some prior clients in their audit process is the expectation was, great, I'm glad you did an assessment from the auditor, but I want to see your review process. I want to see documentation on how you're monitoring yourself. How are you, tracking your progress? And that's where they've spent a lot of their time through the audit process, is looking for those functions inside of the organization. And that was, it's just a good wake-up call that really means they're expecting you to treat this as a program and not as a project. There's just kind of no other way for me to say that. So,
right. Got another good question.
Yeah.
Got another good question for you here, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Can a few small organizations share a security officer? So you're talking about resource-strapped organizations.
Right.
Can multiple organizations be the same person?
And Mudashar, very interesting questions. We have actually had this discussion with a couple of clients potentially that they were in the same POB, two different practices, wanted to quote-unquote work together, share the resources together of working on this. Their compliance, they can't really, so you can't share a security officer. That would not be quote-unquote, because compliance is really in the eye of you as an individual organization. You are tasked with what you're going to do to address the rule set itself. So that doesn't mean that two different organizations or joint organizations could not potentially work from the same set of standards, right? Because many of these policy and procedure adaptations are all standards-based. They all have good general language. It's almost like the 80-20 rule, right? We could adopt the same password management policy structure, but where it gets into where you can't share is you have to have the implementation or procedure of what you're going to do as an organization for that password management. So we may have two different EMR systems that allow a different login capability. I've got single sign-on, the other one doesn't. So the actual implementation of the procedure of how you're going to do password management would then need to be documented by you as an individual company, if you will, or you as, let's say, 2 or 3 small organizations working together. You're still going to have to do some individualized customization on your procedures, and that in order for you to be compliant. So you can't. We think organizations can work together, but somebody's still got to be identified as having that role or hat. You couldn't have a shared person.
Excellent, Mark. Good topic, good thoughts. We are at our 30-minute time, so I just want to close up here. But I want to let everybody know that we'll post a video of this presentation later, and I'll send an email to everyone with a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording. I'll also include Mark and I's contact information, which is also on this last slide. And feel free to let us know if you have any follow-up questions. I touched on our next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks, same time. It is about the upcoming permanent audit program that OCR will be implementing, how to prepare for those, what to look for, and what to expect. So if there are no more questions, I do want to thank Mark for his insights and for his time, and thank all of you for joining us. We hope we will talk to you again in a couple weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.